good evening, wherever your time zone is, good morning, or if it's the next day, all depending on your time zone. This is the first time I've ever done something like this. This is a new channel that I've started last year and actually really got going this year. And given the what's been going on with the past couple of weeks, and especially this week with the COVID-19 epidemic, thought it was time to get out here and put myself out and allow people to actually, communicate me one-on-one, if not to, not to say hi or just, to gain a little bit more insight into some of my thoughts and ideas, but, to distract a little bit from, what's going on. And I say distract in a good way because, if you're too hyper-focused on what's going on out there, it just paralyzes you. And really, we don't all need that. I mean, everybody's anxious about this. I have my anxieties about it, and we all need to deal with that in some sense, and it's not always an easy thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here and probably talk to myself for the next few minutes until somebody decides to jump in with a question. But give it, throw me a question if you want. If you want to know my thoughts on space matters, space law and policy or such, I'm all for it. I think just a ground rule is I just want to let everybody know this isn't legal advice. I got to do this to cover myself because I am a licensed professional and I can't be saying that I'm coming out here giving you advice that you rely upon legally. So please, go with that disclaimer. I would also ask as another ground rule is let's keep the politics to a minimum, partisan politics, that is. Now, politics is part of space no matter what we do, and it's going to have to be and we can definitely talk about it in that context, but I don't want to get into partisan politics, beating the drum for your candidate or mocking, other candidates. I just want to leave that out of this completely. This is going to be, a substantive conversation. It's going to be a hopefully entertaining, and we're going to try and keep it light and to try, focus on other areas. Well, we're here because we love space, and we love space in our own particular way. Now, right now, I know I am competing with the OneWeb launch, which is supposed to go off in about 4 minutes by my clock. So I am kind of competing with that as such. But you have the chat here. If you have a question, throw it out at me, and I'll answer to the best of my ability, and we can have a discussion. And I'll definitely try to answer your questions, to the extent that I am able to. If I can't answer a question, I'm just going to tell you I don't have an answer for that. And there are a lot of things I don't have an answer for. I think, when you get tagged as an expert or an authority or in a certain area, one of the hardest rules you learn is you don't always know everything about everything. I mean, people expect that, but sometimes the best thing for an expert, if you don't know something, is to say, I don't know. And I make a big caveat about the term expert in quotes because, the Bar Association has rules and ethics rules about, basically saying you specialize in something or you're an expert in something. I use that term very colloquially and as just terminology for the sake of you all. So can you hear me all? I mean, how's the reception on this? I'm looking at my microphone. It doesn't look like it's going up too loud. Can you hear me? Thumbs up, chat. Anybody can hear me? I'll just type out a little thing on the chat to get it going. And I'm going to ask you to just bear with me because this is my first time doing this, so it's going to be unscripted. And I kind of say that with the idea that none of my videos are really scripted. I basically go in with an idea of what I'm going to say when I do a recorded video and I say it. So this is a little bit more ad-libbed, and I'm going to have a little bit more. How can you say? Well, let's put it this way. There's going to be some bloopers probably, and I won't have the chance to edit them out by redoing the video or going in and clipping it. So I'm kind of putting myself out there. I kind of feel like my friend, Dr. Livingston, when he gets on an open line show and is basically waiting for callers to come in or to send emails in and actually, give give something to start a conversation. So I guess for a little while here until people start trickling in, or until at least some questions start flowing in, I will probably end up having a monologue with myself, which can be fun, but not. Speaking of the space show, I highly support it, and Dr. Livingston is a good friend. I've known him for quite a few years. I haven't met him yet in person, but I hope to soon in the near future to meet him. But I'm a frequent guest on his show, and just an all-around great guy. I got my space show mug filled with my favorite beverage. Well, not quite full; it's almost gone now because I've been sipping off from it. But yeah, this is it's a good organization. He has a good program, and I encourage you to tune in. And I think his next show is tomorrow. But anyways, just a few things that I've been looking at this past week. One thing was return to the moon. There might be a problem actually getting with delay getting back meeting the 2024 deadline because the SLS processing is basically having some problems because of this epidemic. So they had to cease work on the SLS stages they are working on. So that's a possibility that we're going to see some delays. And I think you're going to see a lot of slowdowns and a lot of problems in the new space industry, or even in the space industry in this year because of interruptions. I know I'm seeing a lot of space events getting canceled, and that doesn't go for space events, but for events as a whole because of the concerns over this epidemic that's going on. And hopefully maybe this thing will subside soon and we can get back on track with these events. I know I just had an event that was going to on May 5th down in DC that just got canceled the other day. So I'm sitting on airline tickets right now, hoping and kind of waiting for a little bit to see what plays out before I reschedule those for another time. There's some other events that I'd like to go to this year, but it's going to see how is this going to all play out. I guess from a perspective of and just kind of to sidetrack it just a little bit here, the whole idea of being a lawyer and everything people talk about, we use the law to solve a problem or prevent a problem, but we have another role as counselors in a sense. And I don't mean that as a professional counselors, as in the psychiatry field, but we talk to our clients in a sense and we have relationships with our clients that go strictly beyond business that sometimes become they look to us for advice that sometimes strays a little bit outside the actual legal arena. And I even find that in space law, that sometimes clients will ask me, what they think, what I think, and I will tell them, this is what I think, and this is why I think you should take this course of action, not just from a business perspective for others. So it really isn't a whole idea of, lawyers are just, these machines that do legal things. We also understand, we're dealing with human beings too, and that we have to basically we have to be able to, how can you say, understand those human elements and make that part of what we do when we give legal advice. I've done it on several occasions, and sometimes people come back. Sometimes people get upset because of what of what I say in that sense. But a lot of times, they also look at it and say, thank me, and say this is something I really appreciate. I'm glad you took the time to actually explain it. And that goes for all areas of law. And space law in itself is really not this thing, not really this area that sits all by itself, all by its lonesome, but rather it takes how can you say it encompasses other areas of law. And like I said, law is about dealing with people. It isn't just about transactions. Even though you may be even if you're just a transactional lawyer or you're dealing with a legal matter, you're still dealing in the end result with a person. And I think that's something we all have to, lawyers have to remind themselves of, is that we're dealing with people, and that, and we have to take the good with the bad when that comes with that, because people have emotions, and especially in a situation like what's going on right now. it is, difficult. It's something we have to take into account as we interact, whether it's here or on social media or such. Um, so yeah, that's that's an important part of being a lawyer. Even being a lawyer who works in the area of space law is something you have to take into consideration. Um, just trying to think here. Some other space related matters. New space. There's concerns about going forward. How the economy is going to be afterwards, and after this is all said and done, and whether there's going to be funding for new space. Those are some of the ideas I've seen coming up. I've seen a lot of things. I've despite everything that's been going on, we've seen a lot of activities continuing. For example, Virgin Orbit is still continuing its progress towards its first maiden voyage of Launcher One, and that is something it will try to. They're going to continue it despite what's going on. It was basically considered a necessary service for the state that it's in, and it's going to continue despite the emergency. I believe that's in California where they're going to be doing a test launch from. So that's one area where things continue. And I think in spaces and everything else, there are still aspects that of life that are continuing even in um, this epidemic that we're going through right now. And in spite of the fear, and in spite of the I hate to say inconveniences, but in some cases it could be inconveniences. Like I can't get my hair cut right now because my lady who does my hair, she is closed until this thing passes, and I understand that, and so I just have to kind of deal with it. Um, so I mean, bottom line is I'm looking for some questions. Throw some questions at me on chat. Do you have anything you want me to talk about? Anything to address? Are there places or people or things in outer space that you want me to talk about, from as far as national security, from as far as planetary exploration, economics, space politics in general? Send me a chat and let me know, and we'll talk about it. Beyond that, excuse me, I had to get a little sip there. They're like I said, things still continue, and after this passes on, they will continue again. I'm going to talk a little bit about the channel. I talked a little bit about that at the beginning. Space Thoughts, whole idea of Space Thoughts came from a blog that I still have on WordPress that I haven't really updated in quite a bit. And of course, when life gets busy, things get left by the wayside. But I decided, instead of really continuing heavy on with my written blog, I'd bring it over to YouTube, and I started the channel. I think I started it last July. I had a lot of problems with it, basically because at that time I was running Windows 7, and I was running a 10-year-old laptop, and the software that I needed to really run this the way I wanted to in high definition like this, I just couldn't do it. Yes, I just touched my face. So, but I washed my hands, so I'll probably be all right. But after at the end of the year, I upgraded to a new laptop, Windows 10. I got a decent microphone, although I'm kind of looking at the microphone space right here now, and it doesn't look like it's doing all that hot in terms of volume. But I'm hoping you all can hear me, and I'll just bring it a little bit closer to make sure that you can. But then I really started off in earnest, and what I'm trying to do now is do a weekly broadcast on different areas that I think are important. I may catch up on an item that is really that cropped up during the week, or I may just decide to talk about a longer topic in general terms of space law and policy. And I'm trying to do those weekly. I think I've done three or four right now. That are on this channel. So if you want to go take a look at those afterwards, I would welcome it, and I also welcome you subscribing to it. I mean, we all have to start somewhere. I have 20 subscribers that I'm grateful for, but I'm looking to build on to this, and I'm hoping to actually get this to the point, with live sessions like this, where where people come in with their questions, and basically, we can have sort of. We can't really have too much of a dialogue because of this is basically a one-sided thing with me doing the talking and you doing the chatting. but I want to, hopefully develop this channel a lot. I mean, I've got a lot on my plate now between, work, and I have my briefing letter, the Pressy. This is it right here. Yeah, something went down. Yeah, this is it right here. This is an older issue, but I'm working on the first quarter issue, and that's coming out this Friday. And I'm actually struggling with it a little bit, how to bring it into place, because of everything that's going on. It kind of changes the dynamics of this all. But yeah, this is what I'm looking to do, and we all have to start somewhere, and this is where I'm starting. So I haven't. I guess bottom line is I want to, looking for some more people. Maybe some more people will join later on. Again, the chat is open. If you want to type a question in, feel free to do it. If not, I'll sit here and talk for a little while. See what else can we talk about. Oh, interesting that on the topic of spring is that spring actually came on the 19th this year, and this is the earliest that spring came in 124 years. I don't even begin to claim to understand how, why that works, or orbital dynamics or celestial mechanics for that matter, why that comes into being. Bottom line is, got so many other things on my plate. The minutia really doesn't interest me at this point as much as, okay, well, it's a little bit earlier this year. That's good. I want more sun. I want more warmth. Although we're looking at a storm right now. We're looking at a storm here on Monday and Tuesday, which is typical of New England, since all the snow is almost gone. Winter has to have at least one last say of what's going on and what's happening. Right now I'm kind of looking outside and the sky's blue, and that's always a good thing to see. Questions, hit me up on the chat. Let me know what you want to talk about. We're about 17 minutes into this. No questions yet, but hey, come on, ask me if you ask me some questions, and we will go from there. Some other topics to think about. Well, let me think here. I'm kind of interested in the proliferation of domestic space laws around the world. I've been watching a few in particular. I think the Ukraine, for example, passed a space law last year, and I think now I'm pretty sure it's in effect right now. The United Arab Emirates, their space law is now in effect, and that's a very interesting space law. We don't have the actual text of it, unfortunately, but it's kind of from what I understand, kind of similar to the other domestic space law, in that it licenses commercial space activities. But it also is very it's interesting because it also, from what I understand, allows the exploitation of space resources, which the United States started with its law, and Luxembourg continued with their law. Now the UAE has their law, and I think that's a very interesting dynamic. And I think we'll segue a little bit here into space resources, to the extent that fundamentally, the whole idea of space resources is, well, was supposed to be a very big topic this year at Copius in June. I don't know if it's going to be or not because of what's happened. The Legal and Technical Subcommittee was supposed to be meeting right about now, but that got canceled because of, well, what's going on with COVID-19. So whether or not space resources will be brought up and be a big issue at the UN like it was supposed to be this year, who knows? But we will definitely see what's going to happen. But it's going to be very interesting because I kind of see two factions coming together, and in a sense of, is this going to be something that's going to be internationally regulated, or is this going to be something individual countries, what I call states? When I say states, I mean sovereign nations, will get to basically do on their own. So I mean, there's kind of a pull there, kind of a fight there, a little struggle there between what I call, basically more international control versus more state control over outer space activities. Excuse me. And I think a lot of that is, again, is going to be very interesting to see how the idea of space resources plays out. The bottom line is, I think for space resources to really take, firm holds, we actually got to go out and do something. Even if it's a demo mission, to go out and do it, just to not only prove the technology, but prove the concept as well. We'll see what happens with that. Again, the COVID-19 is really just messing up a lot of things this year. With and not to, the human tragedy is one thing, and it's and another casualty is some of these other areas. But just like everything else, we'll get through it, and we'll just modify. We'll just basically pick up and modify our approach to it, and see how it goes. So that's Space Resource. And the Hague Space Resources Working Group. I was actually an observer. I was invited to be an observer for that organization. They actually presented earlier, back in, I think it was in February, to the technical subcommittee, I believe, for the continuing for COPE use. So they basically gave a presentation of their efforts and what's called the building blocks. I might actually write a an article for that actual about space resources, something that's public. I've been covering it pretty heavily for my subscribers, to the Pressy, and of what's going on, my feelings on it. But I might actually take a step out and actually write an article in the near future about about space resources and my feelings and my viewpoints and my concerns about some of these other approaches that are being taken or suggested, like the building blocks from the Hague Space Resources Working Group. So that's to be determined as far as time goes this year, but hopefully I can get something out and maybe publish it in the Space Review or something like that. And such. Some other things to think about. What else can we talk about here? Well, I'm talking to myself 21 minutes into this live session. And I don't see any questions yet. Come on, guys and gals, let's get some questions out here. I'd love to field some questions, and it can be topics about space, law, policy, geopolitics. One interesting video I did back about a month or so ago, and in fact, it was my first kind of re-premiere of my channel, was basically, advice for law students and law practitioners who decided they want to get into space into space law. And it's funny, back in February 2017, I was invited to be a speaker at the University of Michigan for a symposium they had, and it was dealt with space law and policy. And I was honored to be asked to do it, and even more so given the people in my presence. There were some pretty heavy hitters in the space law and policy community who were fellow speakers at that symposium. The night before the actual symposium, we were treated to a banquet, and a lot of speakers, we sat around, sat at one table, and we were talking. And one of the topics that came up was, people about, what does it mean to be a space lawyer, and what should law students or practitioners be looking for or looking at, in terms of, what it takes to be a space lawyer. And I think we basically all came down to understanding that, you're really not going to transition from law school and jump right into a pure space law practice, but rather it's something you're going to incorporate into your practice. And that's kind of the way that I found I do it. I'm not purely a space law person. And unless you're really into, something that's dealing with the UN or the government, chances are you're not going to be dealing strictly with space law. But I think the best advice came from a practicing attorney who was sitting next to me. His name will go unmentioned, but he said his advice was become the meanest, nastiest litigator you can, and get those skills. And that's kind of good foundation. And I concur. I think you have to develop your legal skills as an attorney in order to really get out there and practice this. Because and this kind of segues into something else I want to talk about, is that I'm seeing law getting more practical, in that instead of being just an academic exercise, I see law being more of a, how can you say, it's more of an everyday actual practice. And in terms of, and I'm talking about litigation. Now, we're seeing a lot of space related litigations in the federal court system right now, things in dealing with in space and such. But we're not. I don't think we've seen anything that's really come hardened down For example, commercial space flights for space flight participants. I mean, back the commercial space law passed in 2015 basically included a provision that gave the federal courts, what we call subject matter jurisdiction over disputes arising between spaceflight participants and providers of commercial space activities. In other words, these so-called space tourism business. And I thought that was very interesting because this is the first time Congress actually said, okay, this court is going to have jurisdiction of it. State courts don't have any business hearing these cases, but the state courts will. We haven't seen any of those cases yet, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And a whole premise of this is that, we have to, as a litigant, you have to understand the rules of your court. In the case of the United States here, it's very good to understand the rules of not only your state court, but the federal court as well, because most of these cases will be litigated in federal court in front of a federal judge or a magistrate. So you got to know the federal rules of civil procedure. Interestingly, sometimes state law will be applied to these because there really is no federal common law as far as outer space goes. Outer space matters. So the advice I give a lot of people in terms of, well, I want to be a space lawyer. Well, first I crush their dreams when I tell them I'm not going to be a pure space lawyer, but it is to generally, become a great lawyer in and of itself in terms of your practical skills, your litigation skills, your writing skills, your research skills. Know your foundational topics towards contracts, constitutional law, especially for the U.S., because constitutional law plays a big role in how treaties are interpreted and such. Know those subjects, and know how to apply those subjects in your regular practice, and incorporate space law matters into your practice. So, in a sense, space law becomes part of this big melting pot, I guess you could say, of legal. Of law that we have. It comes another thing that's added to it. It doesn't become something that's a side dish that is set all by itself. So, what else to say? Come on, guys. I'd like to see some, let's see a few comments here, but otherwise I'll try and gin up a few other topics that I can think of. Starlink, that's pretty interesting. Starlink is continuing. OneWeb, I mentioned, was launching their satellites today. I think they just mentioned they had bankruptcy and they're going to have some layoffs in there. So that has some implications for the deployment of that mega constellation. But mega constellations have been very in the news lately as well. And this is something that, and the biggest thing is from an environmental standpoint and for the effect that they have on astronomical observations. There was actually an article in Scientific American back I think in January 19th, remember, that basically said there's this paper written by a law student that's coming out in May that basically says that, the FCC kind of, unlawfully approved the deployment of these satellites because it didn't apply what we call the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA. It didn't take that into account. And I really took a look at that, and I actually wrote a special issue for my briefing letter. And I talk about the Prezi a lot, and I'll refer to a lot because that's a huge investment of my time is putting down ideas in that and summarizing things in that. So you'll be hearing me refer to that back and forth again. But I did a special issue back in February, and I won't give you the details. I won't go into the details of how I came about it. But basically, I said no. NEPA doesn't. The idea of NEPA doesn't apply to outer space, and it's just I do the legal analysis for it. I'm not going to go through it here just because it's very voluminous. But bottom line is it's one of those laws that basically doesn't apply to outer space. And this gets back to the thing that I've been telling people is you got to treat outer space as its own domain as far as legal goes. You really can't compare it to anything here on Earth, even though it's, has a lot of its roots in Antarctica and the Arctic Treaty. Space is its whole game in itself, legally wise. And things like NEPA, which was enacted in 1970, they really have no bearing on outer space. So you really can't apply NEPA to that. I think, again, I haven't read the law students this article has come out in this law journal yet, but that's something I jumped on pretty quickly because the media was putting this out a lot, and it's something I thought really needed to be addressed. So I did a nice little analysis on that. Again, for my subscribers, I gotta give them some preference on content right now because they do pay for the subscription that I give them, and that's one thing. And if you're interested, you can email me or go to my website www.spacelawsolutions.com and find out about the Pressy. And I'll send you a free issue, a free quarterly issue, for you to look at if you want. And if you want to subscribe afterwards, I'll get you on board and get you up to speed what's going on. And I'll even include that special issue that I did back in February on Starlink. But bottom line is, with Starlink, the whole thing with NEPA applying, it doesn't work. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. But the rationale for it is, like I said, very long and detailed analysis. And I'm not going to go into it here. Again, the chat's looking awfully empty. People, how about some questions? Keep myself going here with my coffee. No, spring has sprung, and it was 60 degrees last night. I couldn't believe it. I was like, man. And then I got up this morning, and it was almost 30 degrees. And like I said, we're supposed to get a storm again on Tuesday, so I don't know what's going to happen. It's allergy season. I'm definitely feeling it in my eyes and my throat right now, and my sinuses. So yeah, the pollen is active, but that's a good sign because I'm definitely ready for spring and definitely ready for summer. So guys, questions, anything? The chat's looking awfully silent. Say something. Tell me what's on your mind. Challenge me on something. And again, with the ground rules, I don't want to get into partisan politics or anything. But if you want to, talk to me. We're 32 minutes into this live session, and I'll tell you what, I'll go for an hour. If I don't have anything by then, I'll kind of end this and just rack it up as a learning experience, and we can try it again at another point. I'm probably competing with I don't know if the OneWeb launch went off or not, and I may be competing with that. Maybe people just forgot and didn't tune in. That's fine. I mean, I understand, life, and especially what's going on in the world right now. It's easy to forget things, and maybe people just aren't interested. And this isn't everybody's thing. I mean, and this is a very how can you say, esoteric area that's starting to firm up a little bit more, but it's still esoteric. It's funny, here in New Hampshire, I'm kind of an anomaly, I guess you could say, as far as what I do. I tell fellow members of the bar, they ask me, well, what do you specialize in? And I say, well, international law and, in other areas. And they get curious, well, what aspect of international law? I tell them space law, and I get this deer in the headlights look, and they say, what? And I try to explain to them what space law is about. And finally, I said, do you have cable TV or do you have satellite TV? Yeah. Well, space law. And usually that makes sense. Usually that gets the point across that this is, these are the areas that I deal with. But it's kind of funny now that, space law is dealing more than just with, satellites and stuff and things like that right now. It's really expanded beyond international to, domestic. And a real valued colleague of mine we've talked about this at length, that really, the future of space law lies in national laws and actually creating international law from the bottom up. And what I mean by bottom up is international law created by laws that are enacted by states that actually bubble up and into the international arena and are adopted by other states and become what we call customary international law. I think a really good example of this, not so much from a legal a law perspective, is how other states have structured their domestic space laws, and they've basically used the model that the FAA is using as far as their regulations, as far as the laws and as far as the regulations go. That have been modeled a lot on the U.S. with their own tweaks to actually add their own flavor for their own specific. For their own governments, for their own culture, for their own society. So, basically that's an idea of, how states are influencing other states through their activities versus international bodies influencing states from what we call the top down, which usually involves treaties, like the Outer Space Treaty. The Outer Space Treaty is a top down, what we call a top down measure. It creates international law, but from there, states can create their own, regulate their own space activities. They can permit commercial space activities, and they can do other. They can basically take those rules and apply them to meet their own needs. And those include domestic space laws, which go up and influence other states from the bottom up. So it's kind of, circular how this works in a sense. And again, it gets very esoteric, and sometimes it really makes my head spin. I have to sit back and, just take a breath and look at it again. But again, I see a lot more. I see space law, the future of space law, being influenced more by, how can you say, state actions, state domestic laws, versus actual top-down measures from treaties. I really think treaties are dead. For a while, they're dead. The people talked about amending the Outer Space Treaty. Not going to happen. It's a political hot potato to amend the Outer Space Treaty. It's a political hot potato to withdraw from the Outer Space Treaty. So it's pretty much going to remain as is, with states interpreting it to meet their needs. And I think a valued colleague and I, we joke about this often. It's like, what is the outer? It isn't what the Outer Space Treaty says. It's what a state wants it to say. And basically, that's how we get space resources. Basically, the U.S. came out and said we want the Outer Space Treaty to say this, that it allows private individuals to harvest minerals or resources from a celestial body, including the moon, and convert them to possession. It says that, even though it doesn't explicitly say that, we interpret it to say that. So the Outer Space Treaty can be made to, or any treaty for that matter, unless you have it written down, black letter, this is what it says, it can be made to jump through whatever hoop you really want it to. And that's been very, very prevalent. And I think actually that will kind of segue into Article 6 and the quote authorization and supervision provision, where basically states are permitted to authorize commercial space activities, but they're also required to continually supervise. Well, the whole idea behind this is the Outer Space Treaty doesn't tell them how they need to authorize it, or how they have to or what continuing supervision means. So it's up to the states to determine that. It's actually their responsibility. And I think the whole idea behind the Outer Space Treaty, in essence, is to basically set down some foundational rules or some foundational principles, and let the states basically interpret what that means to them and apply it. And that's what's happening. I just think, authorization and supervision is contentious. I know a colleague has brought up that the Outer Space Treaty, that provision of the Outer Space Treaty doesn't apply to private citizens, because it was never the Outer Space Treaty was never executed, or when I mean executed, legislation wasn't enacted to execute those provisions in Article 6 for authorization and supervision. I disagree, because I think all the commercial space laws you have out there right now, starting with the one in 1984, I believe it was 1984 when the Reagan administration pushed this and Congress passed it, and President Reagan signed it. That pretty much enacted it. That enacted that provision, made it part of our actual laws here in the United States. Still an ongoing argument, but that is still a very, very contentious about whether that is the way it is. And really, the whole idea of whether the Outer Space Treaty applies to private individuals is something that keeps on going and going and going. It's just not going to stop, unfortunately. But bottom line is, I can tell you with more than a fair amount of certainty, it applies to private citizens, especially those commercial regulations, authorization, and continuing supervision, whatever it means. And that's the question: what does it mean to each state that basically permits commercial space activities? One of the big nasties in that is continuing supervision that, commercial space companies just are not comfortable with. They don't know what it's going to turn into. Is it the government looking over their shoulder all the time, or the government checking in from time to time, see how they're doing, or basically the government saying, look, Just let us know what's going on and do what you need to do. We don't know yet because we haven't really addressed what continuing supervision means, because the only thing we're concerned about now is launch and reentry, and everything in between is pretty much hands off. Although you can kind of quote regulate those activities with those two different authorizations. And I think a good example of that was with the MEV1 Northrop Space Logistics LLC's MEV1 program. Basically, they were, in order to get a launch license, in order to get it up there, excuse me, pollen, they had to get the permission from the FAA, and they had to go through national security review to see what they were going to be doing. And they had to kind of quote promise that we wouldn't turn this into, it wasn't going to be an anti-satellite weapon. It wasn't going to interfere with other nations' satellites. A litany of promises to, give them confidence that for the FAA to sign off on that launch license to get that mission going. So you can control the activities in orbit to the extent that you can either permit or not permit a mission to launch from your territory. So that's kind of a fun way of getting around this, what we call on-orbit authority that the FAA would I think should have, but doesn't have at this point. Excuse me. We're 41 minutes into it. I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I'll just keep talking for a little bit, to the extent the pollen lets me. Some other things. Let's see. I think the Russian Federation has been talking about an ASAT. Basically, they were talking about bringing up the idea of banning ASAT testing, and this came up a few months, I think, at the end of last year. They want to bring this into the UN and actually, basically create a new treaty, which isn't a surprise, to ban ASAT testing. I haven't heard any more details about it, but this goes back to the idea that the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China have been very heavy on these treaties, these top-down measures to quote ban space weapons, and now they want to basically quote ban ASAT ASAT testing, destructive ASAT testing, which probably is in response to India's test, which actually is. Wow, it's been about a year. It's been about a year now since India did that particular test, and so that's another thing that's going on in the UN right now. Proposed for a ban on ASAT testing probably won't get much. It probably won't get much traction, but it'll make a lot of noise. If you look through the history of, through presidential documents that are available. Through presidential libraries, the whole idea of ASATs have been a hot topic for decades, all through the Cold War, starting with the Eisenhower administration in some respects, and right up on through the Reagan administration when the U.S. actually did perform an ASAT test with the air launched ASAT that we had, and that was subsequently canceled after it was, I guess, pretty successfully tested. So. It's always going to be a hot topic. I'm going to say, bottom line is that when push comes to shove, if the shooting war stops, any ban will be out the window, and things are just going to happen anyways. So you got to be careful what you actually sign. I'm almost 45 minutes into this, and I'm not getting any questions here. So I'm not really disappointed. I understand this is the first time I'm doing this, and I'm still trying to hear. And I'm here talking to myself about different topics. Let me see what else can we talk about. Again, I'd like to see that chat move a little bit, and see what's going to happen. Another topic. What else can we talk about? Oh, the state of Maine, and I actually did a video on this a couple weeks back. The state of Maine has legislation introduced to help facilitate a space industry in the state of Maine, and that's pretty exciting to the extent that when Maine is one of those things when you think of outer space, you don't think of Maine, and I mean, a lot of my southern friends, when they think, and they said, "Oh, you were from Maine," and originally I was from Maine, they said, "Oh, lobster. You must get all lobster you want." Well, I'm not a fan of lobster or seafood for that matter, but lobster is the one thing that comes to mind with Maine. Moose and a lot of acreage, a lot of forests. But you don't think of the space industry, and but this is something that's actually being worked on right now to facilitate industry. And I'm not talking just about a spaceport, but actually, a mission control center, an industry for academia, and an industry that actually develops technology for and actually builds small satellites. So basically, the state of Maine wants to create an industry. They want to create a an industry for Maine. They want to create that for actual commercial. They want to create for education, to retain some of their talent. They want to talk and they want to create a launch industry too for small satellites, and it's all going to revolve around small satellites, but not just to export them out to other outside customers, outside states or other countries, but also to benefit the state of Maine itself for agriculture, for that aforementioned lobster industry that I mentioned, which is absolutely huge here in Maine. I mean, you wouldn't believe how big. I mean, it's a huge industry up here. And the penalties are pretty severe for people who try to get around the rules about it. And Maine lobstermen are very rightfully protective of that industry, and of course very concerned about the environment for their livelihood. So that's one thing that they were talking that they kind of looked at doing small satellites to monitor environmental conditions in the ocean. And with sensors miniaturizing nowadays, it's not out of the question that could happen. So anything that is launched out of Maine will be on the small satellite scale, probably one or two at a time, and not big launches like how can you say an Atlas V or a Falcon 9, or even something like Maritime Launch Services in Nova Scotia is planning on doing, which is going to be medium-sized launches. They're just not going to do it. I mean, there's a possibility you could get biggies like Virgin Orbit in here, because the old Loring Air Force Base way up in northern Maine used to handle B-52 bombers, so it still has the runway and still has the infrastructure where they could conceivably, take flights out and launch satellites from there. So that's something in the work right now. Once this law passes, the council will get together and they will actually work out how this industry is going to be developed, what it's going to take as far as expertise, what it's going to take as far as money, and other legal aspects of it, like what other domestic Maine space laws would be needed to actually facilitate or actually help support that type of industry. So that's something to look forward to as well. But that's a few years down the road. Camden Spaceport is another spaceport that they've been working at. That's been kind of touch and go lately. Because right now there are two lawsuits in federal court. One in federal court and one in Georgia State Court, both against the FAA, basically over the environmental impact statement, saying how basically how the FAA came to this its determination over the draft, and there's massive production of documents going on right now and a lot of litigation over that. So it wasn't a surprise to me that the licensing of the spaceport didn't come through at the end of the year, and kind of I think it's going to be put on hold until these lawsuits are actually straightened out, and two, we get some agreement on that environmental impact statement. So that Spaceport Camden, it's not a certainty, and it's probably going to have some growing pains going into it. And I think with other new spaceports that are coming on, you'll find that is going to be a hurdle as well as the environmental factor, because that's something the FAA takes very seriously when they determine whether or not to give a license to actually launch these rockets or to create or license these spaceports. And actually, there are quite a few spaceports. There is actually a link. If you go to the FAA website or Google, commercial spaceport licenses, FAA, or DuckDuckGo, whichever search engine you use, you can go right there and find out how, see all the spaceports that are licensed here in the United States. Excuse me. Seasonal allergies, gotta love them. Anyways, I'm 50 minutes into this. I haven't got any questions yet. So I guess I'm going to kind of wrap it up for now, because I am seeing my my cell phone's on vibrate right now. I had some calls come in that I probably should field. A little bit disappointed we didn't get some questions or comments, but I hope for people that actually tuned in, you got a rundown of what I'm trying to do here, and maybe at some point we will try another live chat. And of course, we'll probably get some. But I urge you to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing more videos, and in the future, more recorded videos, and we will try this again. Probably when things are a little less stressful and things are kind of whatever normal is now. What qualifies as normal? We'll probably try this again, and maybe with some more topics, or maybe. When I think there's some other important issues that come up that deserve a live interaction versus a pre-recorded interaction. And yes, you see me looking back and forth, and I actually got this little piece here saying, "Mike, look at the camera," and that I haven't been paying attention to. It's kind of odd talking to a camera and not having any human interaction. It's not like Skype doing these live shows or even doing a recording. So it's kind of it's this new experience, and I'll definitely work on giving the camera more attention instead of focusing over here on the screen. Hey, oh, I got one. I actually got somebody that came up and commented. Emily, if you have a question, shoot. I'm still here. I just got my first chat from Emily, and Emily, if you have a question, I can definitely. My calls can wait. I'd be glad to answer some questions. Anything? Don't be shy. There's no such thing as a dumb question, but there are such things as dumb answers, and I try to give intelligent answers whenever possible. I'm gonna, you know what? Since Emily came up and actually chatted, there we go. Do you have any information about property rights in space? That's a good question. And you know what? I'm gonna segue. You're welcome. And I'm glad you asked the question. Now I feel a little bit better about that. People are actually listening, and this is a good thing. And I'm not just here talking to myself. I want to get into. I'm gonna preface the talk about property rights with two things. When people talk about property rights, they're thinking about what are they thinking about? They're thinking about, I'm going to, for example, I want to own a parcel of lunar property. And then, of course, this is an organization called Lunar Embassy where you can basically buy, lunar acreage. Somebody Dennis Hope, he's a contact. He basically, about 30 years ago, claimed the moon and has been selling parcels of lunar real estate since then. I'm not sure what it goes for right now. And I actually, my first law article as a law student actually mentioned that. And my premise was, eventually this is going to be challenged in federal court. And actually, the closer we get, especially with things like space resources, any claims like that actually those claims actually might be challenged. But the whole idea is when we talk about property rights, we're talking about two different types of property rights in the English system. What we call real property rights, which is actually a property you own the physical land. For example, I have if you own a house, you basically not only own the house, but you own the land that's upon. And in a sense, you either own or lease the land or lease the house. And I'm not going to get into a property one or a property two discussion from law school because trust me, it's huge. But bottom line is you have real property rights, which involves land, and personal, what we call chattel property rights, which involves actual possessions. Now, under the Outer Space Treaty, there's basically in Article 2, it says you cannot own any property in outer space. And that includes any parcels on the moon or anything like that. Now, traditional mining claims here on Earth basically involves you going out and having a mining claim. You actually have physical possession of the property. You may not own the property, but you have the right to go on. You have exclusive rights to that property to go in and mine, whether it's gold or oil or whatever resources in there, and convert it to personal use. However, the whole idea of owning a piece of celestial property, say I'm going to go mine an asteroid, you can't own any of the asteroid. Even as a private individual, you can't do that. So, but we have this other thing called personal or chattel property rights. But you can you can have what we call personal. You can convert resources to personal possession. And let me explain this just a little bit deeper. And this gets into a little bit of an explanation um, of space resources and the theory of space resources. And Emily, if you go to www.spacelawsolutions.com or send me an email at michael@spacelawsolutions.com. I'll gladly send you a copy of the Pressy that deals and explains space resources a lot better than I can here. So go to michael@spacelawsolutions.com. And actually, any of my listeners here who are on here, if you send me an email and request that particular issue, I will send that to you. It explains the legal underpinnings of space resources, which I'll continue on, but I'll continue on here. Fundamentally, what space resources says, I'm giving the state is saying to a person, to a private individual, which can include a company, you can go to an asteroid. You don't own the asteroid, but you can go in there and you can mine the water or the metals or any other resources within that. And through the activity, through your actual labors, you actually can convert that water or those minerals to personal possession, and you can do anything when you want with them. And basically, if you look at the U.S. law, it's funny because it basically says that a private individual can go and basically harvest and convert those resources to personal use to sell or alienate to their purpose. Now, in Louisiana, there is this law which creates what we call a mineral servitude. The wording is almost word for word of the space resource law, except the mineral servitude in the Louisiana law creates what we call a real property interest, but the space resource law creates what we call a chattel property interest. Two different things. In other words, you can't own the asteroid, but if you go to the asteroid and get there first and mine the resources, and you're a private individual, boom, you own them. They're yours to do whatever you want. You can sell them on the open market. You can convert them to personal use, whatever. And that's kind of a fundamental of what we, of space property rights. I really hate the topic of space property because it is so deceiving. People want to basically say, if I go to settle Mars, if a private individual goes to settle to Mars, that the property they build their structures on, nobody else can come on. Well, that doesn't happen because you can't own that property. In fact, the Outer Space Treaty is pretty specific that not only in Article 2 that you can't, there can't be any sovereign claims, but also that for example, if I went to Mars and established an outpost there and built up all kinds of infrastructure, I can't basically put a no trespassing sign out. In other words, if another astronaut or cosmonaut from another state or a commercial astronaut came up and wanted to visit, they under the Outer Space Treaty, they can walk right in. We have to welcome. The welcome mat has to be out. You can't put up a no trespassing sign. It just doesn't work that way. So you really don't own space property. You don't own real property or asteroids or the moon or Mars. You can't own it in outer space. There is no loophole for private individuals. That is much. People I keep on getting that thrown in my face. Well, there's this loophole, and in fact, it's this loophole that Lunar Embassy exploits basically to make this claim to the moon and sell these lunar parcels. I was actually tempted at one time to actually just buy one just for the heck of it, just for the novelty. But I'm kind of confident that those will be challenged eventually and thrown out. And that's one of those things that we will see down the road. And actually, when it comes to space property, Emily, there was actually been one case about this, about space property, and that was about the Eros asteroid. Back around around year 2000, near Shoemaker was a probe that was orbiting the satellite, the asteroid. And afterwards, after they were done, NASA decided to soft land it on the moon. And this gentleman by the name of Nimitz, he basically he sued in federal court pro se. In other words, he didn't use an attorney. He went in and sued on his own, and basically, charged NASA for parking the near Shoemaker on his property because he claimed the Eros asteroid. And he basically tried to, get the court to come out and say that the Outer Space Treaty doesn't, permits private ownership of bodies like the asteroid and the moon. And a specific argument was, basically NASA landing the near Shoemaker was, quote, what we call a taking under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. And I'm not going to explain the Fifth Amendment in that sense. It's easy to look it up. The internet is a wonderful engine to search things for, wonderful resource. So go up and read about takings. But basically, he made the argument there was a taking. And the U.S. government was very clever in this. They sidestepped the whole issue of whether the Outer Space Treaty says private individuals can or cannot own property in outer space by saying that Mr. Nimitz did not meet the basic, how can you say, the steps that require to prove a taking under the Fifth Amendment. So they didn't talk about the Outer Space Treaty. They talked about a taking, and they defeated it on that point. Mr. Nimitz appealed it to the appeals, the Court of Appeals, and it was upheld. The motion dismissed was upheld, and it got thrown out of court. So the issue of property rights really hasn't been dealt with in outer space. It probably will very soon. Once space resources becomes more prolific, and it's going to happen. This is going to space resources is a legal paradigm that's going to become international law, and I can tell you that with great confidence, seeing the way it's going right now. But things like Mr. Hope's claims, and the people who actually, quote, own the property, they'll probably mount a legal challenge to determine title, whether or not they have title to those properties. So that was a good question, Emily, and I'm really glad you asked that. But again, if you got my email address, and actually I'll put it right up here in the chat. And any of you who are listening, if you want to get a copy of that, I did a special issue of my briefing letter a couple years ago, and discussed the issue of space resources and explained it in terms that everybody can understand. If you send me an email, I will gladly send you a complimentary copy of that specific issue, and also I'll send you a complimentary copy of my fourth quarter 2019 issue of the Pressy as well. As my compliment, so you can look at my letter, and if you want to subscribe from there, I would love to have you as a subscriber, and I'll be happy to put you on the list. Again, it's a fee-based subscription, but my subscribers seem very happy with it, so I will definitely just point that out. I will leave that up to you. But again, Michael at spacelawsolutions.com. Just mention the free space property rights issue, and I'll send that along with the fourth quarter 2019 issue, which came out at about the middle of December 2019. I'll send that to you as well. Does that answer your question, Emily? Yes, no. I hope I'll definitely get that out to you once you send me an email. And again, any emails you send me, your address will be kept in confidence. I won't be going out and sharing it with the world. It'll be private, and so please don't worry yourself about that. I'm still here. Any other questions you want to ask? Anybody else want to ask? I've got a few more minutes here that'll stick around. Thank you for the question, Emily. That kind of just really that made my day. I'm looking out. Speaking of day, I'm looking outside, and it's still a nice day out there, and fairly temperate. And I'm hoping it's nice there too, where you are, even despite what's going on. It's on everybody's minds, folks. So we're all a little bit anxious about it, but one thing out, and this is the counselor in me going, kind of going again, is, no matter how bad the chips look, just there's always hope, and we got to look at look on the bright side of things. We got to do what we need to do in this situation, but we got to have hope too. Without hope, there's nothing. So, anyways, are there any other questions out there? I'm still here for a few more minutes if there's any more questions. And I'd love your feedback. If not, this is going to be, when I get off, this will be posted on my channel. Again, I would love for you to subscribe if you want, if you would, and share this video. This video will be up, and please leave some comments there. What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I'm open up all feedback. I have pretty thick skin, and I'm looking for constructive criticism. I mean, if you want to bash me, bash me. I mean, I'm here. Trust me, in my years of doing this and becoming more prolific in the area of space law, I have a lot of critics, and that's fine. I can take it. So, but I'm open to constructive criticism, what you like, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see in the future. So, is there anything else out there? If not, I'll wait a few more minutes, and we'll go from. And if not, I'll just sign off and we'll wrap up this first live session here on space law and policy. No other questions? Okay. Well, I guess at this point, I'm going to wrap it up. I thank for those of you who took the time to tune in. Thank you. I got to look at that damn camera. That's one of these things. It's one of the things about live is I got to pay attention to this camera. I'm just sticking my Post-it note back up on my camera to look at the camera. It's a tough habit to do. I'm so used to when you're interacting with people, you're so used to looking at them and talking to them. Talking to a camera is tough, and it's a habit I'm going to have to get into for y'all out there. All right, if there's nothing out there, I'm going to wrap this one up. I hope it's a good day where you are. If it's nice outside, get outside, get some fresh air, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And like I said, I hope you subscribe to my channel, and please share this video with your friends. All right? Okay, I'm going to sign off now, and have a good day.